And because my oldest will be 16 next month, I was looking through his journal and came across a story from when he was 5. I read it with fond memories because it was the little journal entry I put in there about him losing his first tooth. He'd wiggled that tooth and wiggled it. He couldn't wait for it to come out. And the reason he couldn't wait for it to come out is because we had told him that when your tooth comes out, the tooth fairy will come. She will come and she will replace the tooth with a treasure. So he could not wait. Finally, the tooth came out, and that is my boy still to this day that has never been eager to go to sleep. But that night, he dove into bed at bedtime. He could not wait. He put the tooth underneath the pillow. He laid his head down, and he was trying to go to sleep, but every 3 to 5 seconds, he would look under the pillow to see if anything had happened. Finally, he did fall asleep. We let some time pass, and then about 3 o'clock in the morning or so, the 6'2", 250-pound tooth fairy that I sleep next to every night, he got up, he went upstairs, and he replaced the tooth for a treasure. In the morning, I knew when Jackson, and at the time we just had Jackson and Jerry Jr., I knew when they got up. I could hear it. I could hear the excitement, the squeals. I could hear the stomps on the floor. I could hear the eagerness and enthusiasm because the tooth fairy had come and left the treasure. They bounded down the stairs into the room. Jackson's fists were both clenched closed. He ran up to me and said, "Mom, the tooth fairy came. She left me a treasure." I said, "Buddy, let me see what she left you." Opened up one hand, and it was a package of gummy bears, which was a big deal at the time because that was his favorite snack. He opened up the other hand, and it was $5. Now, I don't know what happened when y'all were growing up, but I grew up in the days of dimes and nickels. Can the church say amen? So, I'm trying to be excited for the boy. But really, I'm annoyed about this whole $5 situation. And my husband can see that I am troubled. And if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. After Jackson left the room, Jerry came over to me and he said, "Priscilla, don't worry." He said, "Do you remember that last month was Jackson's 5th birthday?" He said, "Do you remember that we had all of the family over?" Still to this day, we do that. When one of the boys has a birthday, we invite the whole clan over, grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles. Everybody comes to celebrate. He said, "Do you remember they all came? Most of them had cards, and in those cards were $5 bills." He said, "Do you remember we took all of those $5 bills and we put them in a birthday drawer in the kitchen?" He said, "This morning at 3 a.m., I went right inside that birthday drawer." Dave Ramsey would be so proud of us. That's good financial stewardship right there is what that is. So that morning, really what I had witnessed was my little boy getting excited about treasure that actually already belonged to him. Treasure that he already had. He just didn't know it. I came to tell somebody that there is treasure hidden in these earthen vessels. I came to tell you that by God's Spirit there is gift and there is power that has been entrusted to you, that is available to you, available to me as daughters of the Most High King. You need to know that even if you do not believe what the scriptures declare to be true about your treasure, if you don't believe that you've been forgiven or that you already have the victory or that the enemy is already underneath your feet, and that there is no condemnation for those of us who are in Christ Jesus, or that you have been made competent by the Spirit of God. I came to tell you that even if you don't believe it, the enemy does. He knows who you are. What a shame it would be for him to know and us not to. So it's time for us to open up the drawer and start pulling out the treasure. The treasure we've been ignoring, the treasure we've been calling insignificant, the thing that we've said is not enough, not valuable. Lord, if I could just be like her. Lord, if I could just be like that. If I could just have a bit more of that. If I weren't me, then Lord, I'd be enough. He says, you have enough. You just haven't opened up the drawer. Pull out the treasure.
Said we're praying for you, and I know many of you are praying for them as well. It reminded me of when Lisa and I first moved to Houston, Texas in July 2010. Just about 6 to 8 weeks later, we started seeing these signs, and they're all over the highway system in Texas that time of year, just the end of August, early September. Hurricane season is here. Be prepared. And it sounded terrible to us. I mean, we came from the Pacific Northwest where weather wasn't really an issue besides rain. If you had an umbrella and a coat, you were okay. And they all talk about how the West Coast should expect the big earthquake, and Mount Rainier is actually has the potential to get active, but nothing year to year like we saw with hurricane season out in Texas. So we took it really serious the first couple of years. You've got water, you've got everything, the kits that you need. But when the hurricane doesn't come the first year, or the third year, or the fifth year, or the sixth year, you start thinking, we've heard it before. So when there were rumblings in 2017 that Hurricane Harvey was gonna be a big one, I have to admit, we've kind of heard it before. And so then when it hit, it was devastating around Galveston, but not that big a deal around Houston. I thought, well, there we go. But then it moved over Houston and camped out and dropped biblical levels of rain, over 50 inches in just 3 days. It was unbelievable. I'd never seen anything like it. That night, we'd invited 2 friends over. I'm not usually a pay-per-view guy, but there was a scheduled bout between an MMA guy that was gonna actually box a boxer. I wanted to see how that worked, and so I invited a good friend over and his wife. And as the weather got louder and noisier, the wife kept saying, I hope Belle is okay. I hope Belle is okay. Belle is their, at the time, 17-year-old dog. And dog is a little bit of a generous description. If you've been here, you all know I love dogs. I think dogs are amazing. I don't think people deserve dogs. But the reality is this dog had been past its sell-by date for some years. Just this tiny little toy poodle that it sort of resembled a dish rag. You know, the kind that get dry out and you put up there. I mean, maybe it was a pound, and it was literally deaf and blind. You couldn't call it, you couldn't wave to it. You just had to pick it up and put it on the grass, and she figured out what she was supposed to do. And the whole time, as the weather got worse and worse, Tab kept saying, boy, I hope Bella's okay. I hope she's not scared. And her husband, Rob, said, honey, she's deaf and blind. She doesn't know there's a storm. But Tab knew there was a storm, and she just couldn't let it go until finally Rob said, well, do you want me to go get her? Well, if you think we should, he goes, well, I don't, but I think you do, so I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Good little marriage lesson there, guys. Sometimes we just do what's best for our wives. And so he went, and Belle was so traumatized by this storm that she was fast asleep when he got there. So he woke her up, and that's when we knew how bad this storm might get, because Rob had the right kind of car. Normally about 5 minutes from our house. It took him almost 45 minutes to get to us. Roads were already flooding. He had to find new ways to get there. And later that night, as the rains kept coming down, it's not unlike anything we'd ever seen. The ditches started to fill up with water. Our car tires started to be covered in water, at least the bottom half. And now it's inching up toward our house. Now, we lived in a place of Houston called The Heights, which Lisa and I used to laugh at, because it got the title The Heights because it's 28 feet above downtown. We're just 2 miles from downtown, it's 28 feet. Only in flat Houston could 28 feet be considered the Heights. I mean, I'm saying this in the Denver area. But we stopped laughing that night because in the face of those floods, you'll take every inch your house will get you. But as the water's creeping up toward our house, I think, okay, I should have taken this seriously. I got online. This is so pathetic. Okay, what do you do to protect your house in the case of flooding? And I had all of these suggestions. So I looked in the garage and I had nothing to do anything. All I could find was some cardboard and blue painter's tape, which in the face of water is completely worthless. It was so ridiculous. But by God's grace, the water never got up into our house. But it was a good reminder to me that just because the storm didn't hit the first year or the third year or the fifth year, it doesn't mean it's not going to come. In fact, if you live in certain parts of this country, the question isn't if the storm will hit. The question is when the storm will hit. And will you be ready? And it is so easy to just be lulled to sleep when the storm never comes. And it's not just true of climate, it's true of the state of our relationships and our marriages in particular. We see people going down in storms all the time. It might be a financial storm, but that's never gonna happen to us. We've handled our money. Or a medical storm. Well, we're a pretty healthy family. Or betrayal. Well, that's just not us. I've talked to so many couples. They can't imagine they would ever smell that storm until it threatens to blow down their house. So today, as we wrap up this series on relationships, we wanna look at how will your marriage stand in the face of a storm that has wiped out so many other homes. Now, singles, I want you to hear as well, because this is so key. When you think about marrying someone, if you want to get married or choose to get married, this is something I find that singles rarely consider. It's all about, do we have fun on dates? Do we get along? Are things good? It's one thing to be fair weather friends, but are you considering marrying someone who has the character and the spiritual maturity to go through a storm with you? Because storms are inevitable. And frankly, whether or not you're married, everything I'm about to say here is as relevant for singles as it is for married people, because whether you're married or single, you will go through storms. And Jesus wants to prepare us for that. And I think in some of his kindest words, he mentions this in Matthew 7, so we can get ready. He says this, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, there's something about Jesus has spoken something. Jesus says, if you've heard these words and then you make them a part of your life, that's like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rocks. Jesus said, the storm came, this house stood. Now, what's the next thing? But everyone who hears these words of mine, they don't put them into practice. They're like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Now here's the danger we have to be aware of. The storms will hit your house. You don't know what direction the storms are gonna come. You don't even know what kind of storms they'll be. But one of two things will be true when a storm hits your house. Your marriage will be a fortress against the storm. And the enemy can send the worst winds and rain and anything you could imagine. And it'll be like this fortress, and you'll stay inside and you'll grow stronger. Or your marriage will collapse with the storm. And when that happens, your marriage will become the biggest problem. Bigger than whatever storm lashed out against your house. Now, the crumbling of your marriage will be the biggest problem. So how can we be like those that Jesus says puts his words into practice so that when the storms do hit, we can stand?